Welcome alien fans and space junkies to another marvelous video. In today's video, we're taking a jump into the world of aliens, specifically the Xenomorphs. Have you ever wondered what a Proto-Xenomorph is or where these bloodthirsty suckers are from? Well, you are in luck as we're looking into that with the added bonus of exploring the life cycle too. So get your gear together fans as we head into the unknown. Welcome again to Marvel's Videos Proto-Xenomorph Origins and Life Cycle Explored. But before we go into explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. What is a Proto-Xenomorph? Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the Proto-Xenomorph, or as I'd like to call it, the Xenomorph's wild and crazy cousin that shows up to the family reunion in leather and spikes with a taste for carnage and a flair for the dramatic. So what exactly is a Proto-Xenomorph or Protomorph? As those really committed fans like to call them, take the Xenomorph that we know and love, but take one step back to a time when evolution still fiddled with the blueprints. The Proto-Xenomorph is the rough draft, the beta version of the Xenomorph, which is full of potential but still a little rough around the edges. Now let us get down to business. The Proto-Xenomorph is an endoparasitoid creature, in other words, a parasitic alien that utilizes a living host to incubate its offspring. Sound familiar? Well, that is because the Proto-Xenomorph shares a number of characteristics with the Xenomorph. It's not exactly a carbon copy though. This early version of the alien has a few kinks. For example, let us take the Deacon, which is generally referred to as the Proto-Xenomorph. This is a bipedal nightmare with several features, including more human-like teeth. It stands erect like it is ready to march into battle or perhaps give a motivational speech on how to be the best parasitic alien you can be. Unlike its Xenomorph cousins, the Deacon does not have any tail to whip or stab people from behind. But do not let that make you think it is not as dangerous. Its head, being sharp and pointed like some kind of battering ram, is its weapon of choice, and it does not bother with the normal biting or clawing through the ribcage like your normal chest burster. No, the Deacon prefers to puncture its way out with a pointed skull, like in some kind of morbid game of pin the alien on the human. But the Proto-Xenomorph did not simply pop out from nowhere. It was spawned by these living constructs called proto-hives, created by some inscrutable beings called the Fulframen. For all intents and purposes, these proto-hives could be considered the alien equivalent of a startup incubator. Instead of nurturing tech startups, they nurture the next generation of galactic horrors. It is also worth mentioning that the Proto-Xenomorph is of a different species of Xenomorph, which Ripley had the displeasure of crossing on LV-426. Now, this is a far more primordial variant, a prototype if you will. It is the first stab at what would eventually become the sleek, deadly Xenomorphs we all know today. The Proto-Xenomorph was born from the black liquid on LV-223, a moon in the Zeta Reticuli system. In any case, this black goo was some sort of cosmic Play-Doh in which the engineers created these early alien forms. When you think about it, the Proto-Xenomorph was a wilder, more primitive ancestor of the Xenomorph. It was some sort of tailless bipedal menace that really set the stage for all the chest-bursting chaos to come. Characteristics of the Proto-Xenomorph. The Deacon's body is blue and silky with 4 fingers, a thumb, and plantigrade legs. Their mouth has 2 sets of teeth. The creature's lower and inner jaws have a relatively limited number of sharp teeth, while the upper jaw has teeth typical of herbivores. There is an almost apparent second set of gums supporting the outward extension of this lower jaw. The head of the Deacon ends in a sharp point, and it does not have a tail like the other comparable Xenomorphs. Given the magnitude of its host, it is reasonable to believe that Deacon is extraordinarily huge, while its exact dimensions are unknown. It looks enormous enough to be at least comparable in size to a fully grown human, even though it is smaller than the Engineer when it is a baby. Life cycle and emergence. A Proto-Xenomorph's life cycle is like a nature documentary that is produced by H.P. Lovecraft, scripted by Ridley Scott, and combined with the wildest fever dream you've ever had. It starts off innocently enough. The Hesdalen lights as no ordinary atmospheric phenomena. They are ionic protoplasmomorphs that represent the first stage in a Proto-Xenomorph's life cycle. Think of tiny glowing spores humming in like the universe's most sinister fireflies, just looking for some poor, unwitting space station or ship to latch onto. Once they find their target, they do not just move in, they start turning their new home into a proto-hive, which is basically the creepiest real estate development in the galaxy. The next stage in this fairly unsettling life cycle is the uteropod stage. As the proto-hive takes root, it begins its hostile takeover of the life support systems because why would it not? What is a little suffocation between friends, huh? With life support sabotage and the hosts inconveniently incapacitated, it is time for the uteropod to go to work, which is to secure the hosts in a centralized chamber and suspend them from the ceiling like the world's most terrifying chandeliers. Then, to make even the most seasoned horror fans squirm, the uteropod injects hosts with genetic material that morphs them into proto-ovomorphic uteropods. These lovely pods, also affectionately referred to as wombats, are, in essence, a breeding ground for the next phase in the life cycle of Proto-Xenomorphs, which is the naiad. The naiad is when it gets really weird. Just think of it as a four-armed squid trying to win the Halloween costume show with most disturbing cephalopod. These little squid babies are not content to simply squirm about, they want to survive, so they scuttle off looking for a safe place to hide, and they are happy to just sit there in hiding until they have prepared themselves to evolve into something even nastier. And that is when the Trilobite, the adult form of the naiad, enters the picture. Now, this is not the kind of Trilobite you would find fossilized in a museum. No sir, this is a nightmarish creature that can infect engineers or unlucky humans with an embryo. And this embryo is no ordinary baby. No, it is a Deacon in waiting. Once implanted, the embryo starts siphoning off biological material from its host, getting bigger and bigger like the galaxy's most horrifying parasite, until it is large enough to kill its host in the process. And finally, the Deacon bursts onto the scene, quite literally, actually. When it is ready to emerge, it does so with all the grace of a bull in a china shop, hacking out with that sharp, hooked head from the now-dead host. While the Xenomorphs make their first appearance as rather creepy little larvae, the Deacon is almost fully formed as it bursts out of its hosts, ready to cause terror to anything and everything in its path. When I heard life cycles, I thought it was all about butterflies and flowers. I did not expect squids, pods, and horrifying chest-bursting nightmares. Well, I guess that is the world of Proto-Xenomorphs, where evolution is less about the survival of the fittest and more about the survival of the most terrifying. The role of the engineers. Although David was the one who invented the Xenomorphs, the bioweapon that gave them their form was constructed by the engineers. Exposure determines whether the victim's DNA is broken down, killing them, or whether they are able to give birth to monsters like Neomorphs, which will destroy the rest of the population. What was the initial reason behind the engineers' creation of the virus? It might have been to destroy their works, but I think the solution is in Aliens Colonial Marines. Yes, I am referring to that terrible game, but keep in mind that it is canonical and that the developers even discussed Prometheus with Ridley Scott during its development. An Easter egg in the video game depicts a holographic combat between the derelict and another ship, which culminates in the ship crashing on LV-426. This indicates that there was a conflict between the engineers and their adversaries, suggesting that the virus was designed as a weapon against them. Furthermore, the concept that there is a civil war among the engineers is supported by the fact that the other ship in the video resembles the one shown in the Prometheus prologue. David's experiments in the evolution of Xenomorphs. Oh, David. Who is he, you ask? Well, he was an android with a god complex, a penchant for Shakespeare, and a hobby that puts even the maddest of mad scientists to shame. Apparently, in his spare time, rather than quoting Ozymandias and playing the flute, David was hard at work creating a new breed of nightmare fuel in the form of Xenomorphs. And to think it all began with the engineers and their little bioweapon, chemical A03959X.91-15, and that is quite the mouthful. I really wish they came up with an acronym for that or something. Well, this bioweapon gave us the Deacon, a monster child of the unholy union between an infected Charlie Holloway, an unsuspecting Elizabeth Shaw, and a very unfortunate engineer. But let us go back in time for a bit to Planet 4, shall we? Now this is where David was stuck for 10 long years without so much as a smidgen of hope, only the unquenchable thirst to create something and a mystery pathogen keeping him company. Some might spend 10 years on a remote planet contemplating existence, maybe writing a novel or growing an impressively long beard if they could, but no, David's ambitions were much bigger. He was not going to be content just to muse or dabble in a little light gardening. No, he was out to play God in the most terrifying way possible. The result? The birth of the Proto-Morph, precursor to the Xenomorphs we all know and love to fear. David's experiments began with the pathogen, which is a heinous substance that even the most virulent viruses would blush at its capability. And this was no ordinary pathogen. It was the creation of the engineers, which was designed to mutate and destroy and generally wreak havoc wherever it went. David, ever the curious fellow, found this pathogen and realized that when introduced to various species, it could give rise to a whole host of new life forms. And an idea was born. What if he could refine these creatures, perfect them, and create something truly magnificent? Or, in David's case, something hugely monstrous. His workshop was something out of a macabre art gallery, exhibiting every phase of his ghastly process. Just imagine this, misshapen creatures pinned up like butterfly specimens, each one more hideous than the last. Various eggs, some the size of a golf ball and others as large as a soccer ball, each with the potential for something terrible inside. And then, of course, there are the shock troops of the genetic assault, tiny parasitic wasps created from fungal life forms that the pathogen infected. But of course, the crowning glory of David's work had to be the Proto-Morph, a creation that would send even a seasoned Xenomorph shaken in its exoskeleton. The road leading up to that success was paved with a trail of failed experiments, each one that was another step toward what David was trying to achieve. He dissected, mutilated, and experimented on anything and everything he could get his hands on, including poor Elizabeth Shaw. Shaw, who had managed to survive the horrors of LV-223, only to become one of David's many failed attempts at creating the perfect organism, was reduced to a mere tool in his grand design. Her organs and essence were used to further his experiments, though they eventually proved fruitless in his quest. Fast forward to 2104, and the crew of the Weyland-Yutani colony ship Covenant found David little slice of hell on Planet 4. Lured in by a hologram of Shaw, they were promptly deposited into the clutches of David and his creations. By that time, David had refined his design and created eggs that harbored the ultimate predators. But these eggs were just a little different from the ones we've seen. Captain Chris Oram, in a foolish move, trusted David. I mean, who would not? A guy in a creepy lab filled with horrors, of course, you would trust such a guy. Well, the captain soon became the recipient of a facehugger's affection, which led to the birth of what David proudly believed was the perfect organism. But it did not quite play out the way David wanted. The terraformist of the Covenant, Catherine Daniels, bested the so-called perfect organism, much to David's disappointment. But David was nothing if not tenacious. He had another ace up his synthetic sleeve, a second parasite that had infected the security chief, Dan Lope. Then David switched places with the ship's android, Walter, and took off with the crew back to the Covenant. Another alien emerged on board and created havoc on the ship. Daniels, of course, proved again to be a resourceful survivor and subdued the creature once again, leaving David fuming in his frustration. But David was far from done, not by a long shot. Leaving the crew in hypersleep and having smuggled 2 parasite embryos aboard, he set his eyes on new horizons. The experiments would continue, and he had grand plans for the unsuspecting colonists aboard a Covenant. Daniels caught his interest, and he planned to use her in his quest to create a Xenomorph queen, which is a concept chilling to think about given his track record. Who would have thought a little black liquid and one very curious android could create such a Frankenstein-like nightmare? What are the key differences between the Proto-Xenomorphs and the Xenomorphs? The Xenomorphs and their primordial cousins, the Proto-Xenomorphs, might seem cut from the same terrifying cloth, but they are as different as night and even darker and more menacing night. These 2 species of aliens are horrifying in their own separate ways, and the differences between them are fascinating to say the least. The Xenomorph is a product of evolution or bioengineering gone rogue, depending on how one looks at it. Meanwhile, the Proto-Morph is the beta version of this otherworldly terror. A quick rough draft of David, the android with a serious god complex from Alien Covenant, If the Xenomorph is the finished product, shiny and smooth, then the Protomorph is the prototype, edgy and still working out its place in the universe. But David did not stop there. He could not just design the perfect killing machine without putting his own little artistic flourish on the Protomorph's design, fast-tracking their life cycle to make them even more insect-like. The first major difference between the two creatures can be seen in the way they are produced or birthed. The Xenomorph's birth is a painful, deliberate, drawn-out affair, an extended process from a facehugger's embrace to a lethal chest-burster, which takes hours. Compare that with the speedster Protomorph, which implants its embryo via facehugger in seconds. When it is time to be born, the Protomorph simply bursts forth in all its glory, arms and legs intact, rather than suffering this slithery, snake-like stage through which Xenomorphs must go to. In other words, the Protomorph shows up to a black tie event fully dressed while the Xenomorph is still fiddling with its cummerbund. The physical differences between the two species are striking as well. Xenomorphs are biomechanical nightmares, sleek, curled, and functionally terrifying in design. The classic secondary inner jaws was perfect for perforating through the hardened exteriors of their unfortunate prey. Their Protomorph cousins, particularly the Deacon types, have a more minimalist art feel to them. Save for its ribs, which pop just enough to remind you it is still a threat, the Deacon is all smooth lines, opposite the industrial style that defines a Xenomorph. Adding to the general nightmarish image is the way in which its goblin shark-influenced jaw unhinges and pushes forward in such a nightmarish display, offering a smile only a creator like David could love. Of course, when it comes to procreation, Xenomorphs are hived and ruled by queens, who oversee the brood for the most part. Protomorphs are more of a do-it-yourself project. No queens, no hives, just David playing with black goo and human DNA in a cosmic lab like a mad scientist, creating creatures without a higher purpose than the need to exist and create chaos. The breeding habits of the Protomorph remain shrouded in as much as mystery as David's true motivations, leaving us to assume whether they would evolve over time into a more defined structure or be solitary predators leaving destruction in their wake. In the grand scheme of cosmic horror, the Xenomorphs may have stolen the spotlight, but the Protomorphs remain the underground legends, the cult classics that provide the groundwork for the terror yet to come. And let us be real, if I ever come across either of these nightmares, it will not matter which the two of is more polished, I will probably be halfway out of the airlock, hoping for a quick way out. Marvelous verdict. And that marks the end of yet another marvelous video. We hope you guys had fun learning about the Proto-Xenomorphs and their life cycle, much as we did. It sure is interesting how deep the alien lore goes. We hope to keep exploring this rabbit hole further with you as our exciting adventure through the world of Xenomorphs draws to a close. We hope you give us more suggestions on what we should explore next, so stay tuned for more nightmare-inducing journeys in the captivating world of aliens and Xenomorphs. So what excited you the most about this exploration? Was there anything specific about them that captured your curiosity? Let us know all about it in the comments down below. And if you liked this video, do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button on your way out. It means the world to us when you help us grow. And until next time, guys, have a good one.